Hello, everybody, and welcome to Competitively Viable, the weekly Magic the Gathering news podcast made by a few competitive players who thought they can make a podcast. And in this episode, the first episode, it's going to be a quite interesting episode because we not only have a BNR announcement to talk about, we also have the rebalancing on Magic Arena, as well as a bunch of spoilers for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. But before we get into that, I have to introduce my co-host. First off, we have William.
Hello.
And then after William, we have my brother Luke.
What's up?
All right, so because it came out first, the first thing we're going to talk about is the BNR announcement. So, William, what was banned?
Well, what was banned? Let me see. There was Oren's Epiphany banned in standard, as well as Divide by Zero and Faceless Haven. In Legacy, Ragavan was banned. In Historic, Memory Lapse was banned, originally suspended, and then Teferi Time Raveler was unbanned, but it will get rebalanced.
All right, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, you see, it, a week ago, they announced the 2022 Challenger deck archetypes. And one thing that I was a bit confused about is why there is no Izzet control, because, it was top of the meta. But now that they've banned Alrund's Epiphany and Divide by Zero, I can really see why, because this deck is going to take a real hit from this.
And Luke, do you have anything to...
Well, I think for one thing is that now, what used to be called 3 Fairy is now going to be called 4 Fairy, but there's also 3 Teferis that are 4 mana, so we don't know now what this is gonna do.
Oh, jeez. I think I'm just going to keep calling it 3 Fairy, because that's what it normally is. But, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it a good Teferi, because there are only 2 good Teferis that you play and control, and those are this Teferi and Teferi Hero of Dominaria. So I could call it 4 Fairy. Yeah, 4
Yeah.
Fairy.
I guess that works.
So I'm gonna be
Now,
playing 4
I don't
anyway.
think any of us play Legacy, but also, in Legacy, Ragavan was banned. Does anyone really know anything about that, or do we just say,
Well,
okay?
Well,
I get
it.
from what I can tell, I think Legacy is a lot like Modern, so I'm just thinking it might take a
No.
hit.
I mean,
So
from what I can
in
tell, it's Legacy with
the
Force of
main
Will.
dominant
Yes.
Or
deck
Modern with Force
has
of Will.
been. Hello. Yeah. In Legacy, the main deck has been Izzet Delver, which has been, you know, completely what do I call it? Buffed by Modern Horizons 2 and the addition of Dragon's Rage Channeler and Ragavan.
And Murktide region.
Yes,
And Murktide region. These cards have powered it up from being, top of the meta, but the meta is still pretty stable, to Dragon's Rage Channeler being like a better Delver, and Ragavan being another really powerful one drop that they can play. Murktide also played a huge role by being a amazing finisher.
And
So
because of
Ragavan,
the
Ragavan-
lower mana value in general of Legacy, I believe, Ragavan can snowball games even faster
Yeah.
because one hit lets you cast your any target removal spell and get a card off of their library, which because of how many one drops are in the format, most likely you'll be able to cast with that treasure.
Yes.
yep.
Um.
Overall, I think Ragavan being banned from Legacy is very healthy for it, but it does bring up one question. Why was it banned in Legacy and not Modern?
Yeah, I do think that's a big question. Maybe it's because Legacy has a few different cards, and they're just hoping to maybe put a different deck in Legacy, because...
Well, I think
Yep.
really the reason that it was banned in Legacy but not Modern is that they've realized that Modern is making one heck of a load of money Legacy, not so much. So they've decided that they want to keep Ragavan around so they can reprint him in future sets and hopefully be able to sell those sets almost exclusively on Ragavan, kind of in the same way that Masters 25 sold on Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Agreed. Although they could have banned a lot of things in Modern. They could have banned Luris, which would have, you know, they're not reprinting Luris anytime soon because of the
His companion.
companion mechanic and how that was very, centered on Ikoria, unless they reprint it in a master set or something.
Yeah, but it's not coming back to standard.
Well,
Yep.
and then I think the other thing that it would be in the favor of the lure span is that would seriously shake up the meta because 45% of decks or whatever is playing Luris. So then all these decks are like all of a sudden, hey, maybe I want a Liliana the Veil, and then you reprint Liliana the Veil and make millions.
Yeah, but
the other reason I can see for keeping Luris around is Rakdos mid-range piles. Ragavan is played in Rakdos mid-range piles, so as well as a lot of other very powerful Modern Horizons 2 cards like Dothy Voidwalker and Dragon's Rage Channeler, etc. So, because they can keep this deck in the meta, that means that more people are going to be buying Modern Horizons 2, which means, more people buying...
More profits.
Yeah.
Yep, more profits, more Ragavans, That is why I think they would not choose to ban Luris. But a shakeup really would have been nice.
Yeah, I guess so.
One thing though is going back to standard for Faceless Haven. I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to make totally new decks in standard. Cause they totally downgraded mono white and mono green by doing that.
Well, I think it's good to have multiple decks on a similar power level, because otherwise, when it's a format's dominated by 3 decks that have were basically solved since week 1 of Midnight Hunt, it really just gets very stale.
Yeah, that is definitely.
And speaking of stale metas and a fix for that, we are going to go over to rebalancing in Alchemy, where there was one heck of a lot of changes. I mean, I think they rebalanced 25 something. I don't know. Or maybe no. 25 is the date that they were changed on. Okay. Anyway. 18 rebalanced cards.
Okay.
First off...
Should I go over them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go over them? Okay, so first of all, we have Aceric the Archlich, which they removed opponent's option for the sacrifice trigger to sacrifice a creature on the attack trigger. For assemble the parts, they lowered the cost to bring something back. For Blood Rage Alpha, they increased its toughness by 1. For Cloister Gargoyle, they lowered the cost, but they also lowered the toughness by 1. For Dungeon Descent, they made it enter untapped, and they decreased the cost by 3. For Eliwick Tumblestrum, her ultimate has been lowered by 1 raised by 1 loyalty. Basically, it's a -6 instead of a -7. Fate's Reversal has been reduced by 1 for its mana cost. Find the Path now adds 2 mana of any color, any 1 color, as opposed to just green. Puppet Razor they increased the toughness. Precipitous Shot costless. Triumphant Adventure has 1 more power. Okay, now we go into more card adjustments. So These are nerfs.
If I
now.
could say one thing, William,
Okay.
I do
Yep.
think now they're trying to push venturing into the dungeon
Yeah.
very
Oh,
hard
yeah.
into alchemy.
I think what they're doing here is that they're trying to push the stuff that they thought that and found was very fun in testing, but they're just realizing just didn't make it in power level. So they're pumping dungeon cards, surprisingly green dungeon cards, even though the dungeon deck as when Adventures of the Forgotten Realms came out was an Esper deck. So maybe they're trying to push some kind of Abzan venture deck, as well as cards like
Yep.
Blood Rage Alpha and Puppet Razor, which are cards that, from what I can tell, are just cards that they thought would be cool, but just didn't really make it.
Yes.
Yep. For the card nerfs now, we have Divide by Zero. Now it only learns if it targets a spell or permanent with mana value 4 or less. So similar to like Fading Hope, uh, Fearsome Whelp, it now triggers on upkeep instead of end step, but it has haste. Hullbreaker Horror, they removed this spell can't be countered, so you can counter it now. Inquisitor Captain, they added if you cast it to its enter the battlefield trigger, so now you can't blink it anymore. Or Glasspool Mimic can't be used on it anymore. Liar, they added during your turn to the flashback ability, so now you can only do it on your turn. Sanguine Brushstroke, instead of loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, now it's just loses 1 life. Town Razor Tyrant, they added non-basic to it. And now, last but not least, Teferi Time Raveler, they added a mana to it, so now it costs 2 white blue. It has 5 starting loyalty, and the static ability comes your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, as opposed to your opponents can't cast spells at instant speed. What do you think about these nerfs?
I think most of them were pretty good, especially like the Hullbreaker Horror, Divide by Zero.
I think what happened here is they kind of looked at the alchemy meta and just saw what decks were doing well and just took them down a notch, right? Blue control decks, Divide by Zero was too good of a way to get into the late
Yep.
game, and so they made it
Dragon's
so that it's
decks,
harder to get the
Fearsome-
card advantage off of
Yep.
it. Fearsome
Dragon-
Whelp, they made it more interactable,
Yep.
which I think is big because every time I played against Fearsome Whelp, they get that 1 mana and that just turns the tide of the game.
Yep.
Hullbreaker Horror is worse in control mirrors. Inquisitor Captain,
Inquisitor Captain mostly stays the same for like a mono white aggro deck. It's just that doing more broken things like Soul Herder or Glasspool Mimic to put like
this is just
eight
from what I can
copies in your
tell,
deck.
this is just turning off the Bant's Blink deck, at least the Inquisitor Captain part of it, in Historic, which wasn't exactly dominating the meta, so I don't see why
Yeah.
this was necessary.
Yeah. Some of
think
these I didn't really
was-
get.
It was unintentional game design for Inquisitor Captain to be used in that way. It was mainly meant as like an aggro card, and I believe that is why they changed it. And they only changed it a little bit. As I said, it still
Yeah.
works in aggro
Yeah.
just fine. I think it was just doing something that they unintentionally meant for it to do.
I feel like
Didn't
the
intend for it
idea
to do.
of oh, we did something unintentionally, let's put it to how we wanted it. Really, I don't like that mentality. I kind of like the idea of, oh, people found a fun, cool way to use this card. Why not let them?
Yeah. Like, I've made these fun decks before, and they didn't get banned. But I don't see why OK deck, it's not going to be game changing, should be banned out of a format. If the player base is having fun, I think they should keep it in.
Blink was still a meta deck, even if it wasn't top tier. It was like tier 1.5, and
There's enough 1.5
He was
tier decks in
playing
Historic that
three
I don't think
Inquisitor
that's a
captain.
problem.
Yeah, I think that this was not a good ban on Wizards' part.
I don't know. Maybe they have more things in the future. Maybe not.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe when we go back to Dominaria, there'll be some kind of blink shenanigans that they want to make
What
so
do you
that
think
deck
about-
doesn't become too good. Who knows?
We already
Yes.
talked a little bit about Teferi being unbanned, and
Yeah.
how do you think about its rebalancing overall?
I think it's good because Teferi is boring to play against.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? It's really fun to against.
William,
You
not
control
everyone
players.
plays control.
It's a control player. The instant speed thing, I understand why that was taken out, because that was like broken. That was like the broken part of Teferi. The fact
Yeah,
that
that much was pretty insane.
they
And for
couldn't do
3
anything
mana?
at instant speed. It just basically turned off any sort of you know instant speed.
Interaction, really.
Yeah.
Right here it says Finale of Promise, which wasn't really a top tier card.
I believe that there are a
and
couple copies are played in Phoenix. but-
And also Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is
He's
a popular card.
It's a
And it would prevent
I think
things like
played card.
this. I like that they bumped the starting loyalty a little bit, so now it's a
Yeah.
bit safer when I, -3
now
and bounce
is
it
this
to
Yeah.
draw a card.
only changed in Alchemy?
Yes, that's only
It
changed
is
in
only changed in Alchemy.
Which
When you play this card in Pioneer and Modern, is it banned in Pioneer? I have no clue. When you play the card in Pioneer and Modern, it
Yep.
is still going to be the same old card, which is weird.
Yes, I personally think that I feel like Wizards could have done it different. Although Alchemy isn't only MTG Arena format, I still think it's kind of going to be weird to adjust to that, how some cards are played different on Standard as of Alchemy or Alchemy to Historic. Or Modern.
Okay. Do you want
All
to
right,
move
yeah, I think that's
on
basically
to the
hitting
big
all of the
thing?
big cards that got nerfed. Now I think we'll go on to one of the bigger topics. So this is the second day, as we're recording this, of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty spoilers.
Yeah, these are going to
And-
be very exciting, I think.
Yeah. So we have seen all sorts of cool things. A bunch of new things in the type lines that we've never seen before. I think this is Wizards just pushing the boundaries of what cards can do, especially because they have the whole techno world thing, and I think
Yeah.
that changes things.
I think they kind of did it
Wait, we'll
weirder
leave that
than
for
normal.
later. Now let's just talk about the cards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we should start off with the Planeswalkers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Let's do it.
Luke, what do the Planeswalkers do? I guess we can start off with the Wandering Emperor.
So the Wandering Emperor is 2 white for a 3 loyalty flash, no text line. It doesn't say
no type
what-
line.
like it doesn't say Wanderer. So I'm assuming it's Wanderer.
It is the Wanderer,
So
but we don't have a name,
thing
so they
to
don't
note-
have a.
One thing
They
to
are not
note,
giving it a.
the Wanderer
Planeswalker
from
type.
original. One thing to note: the Wanderer from original War of the Spark did not have a type line either. It was also just a legendary Planeswalker.
Yes. But alright, back to the card. As long as the Wandering Emperor enters the battlefield this turn, you may activate her loyalty abilities anytime you could cast an instant. +1, put a +1/+1 counter on up to one target creature. It gains first strike until end of turn. -1, create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance. -2, exile target tap creature. You gain 2 life.
I think it's interesting how they're experimenting with Planeswalkers that have stuff that talks about when they enter the battlefield or the turn they enter the battlefield.
Yeah.
That way they get a more powerful effect then, and then they can just kind of incrementally get you
Yes.
value from there. But um, on that first turn, you can kind of play them and get a big effect. Like this card can definitely lead to some blowouts if you use it, if you get in a good scenario with it.
Yeah. Speaking of experimenting on planeswalkers, we have Tamio. So there's some weird story behind this.
William, I believe
Yeah.
you know some of the story behind Tamio.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us that?
First of all, read the card. Read the cards first, and then I'll tell you the story about Tamio and why it has a Phyrexian mana symbol in it.
All right,
Alright.
so it is 2 green, blue, and then a Phyrexian blue-green hybrid, which means you can pay blue-green or 2 life. It is a 5 loyalty legendary planeswalker Tamio with completed, which says if you use the paid life for the Phyrexian mana, then it enters the battlefield with 2 fewer loyalty counters. It's got a +1. Tap up to 1 target artifact or creature it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. -X. Exile target non-land permanent card with mana value X from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of that card. And a -7. Create Tamio's Notebook, a legendary colorless artifact token with spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, and tap, draw a card.
And then, do we want to read off Tezzeret, Betrayer Flesh? Tezzeret, Betrayer Flesh, 2 blue for a 4 loyalty legendary planeswalker. Tezzeret, the first activated ability of an artifact you activate each turn costs 2 less to activate. +1, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact card. -2, target artifact becomes an artifact creature. If it isn't a vehicle, it gets base power and toughness 4/4. -6, you get an emblem with whenever an artifact you control becomes tapped, draw a card.
All right, now that we've seen the planeswalkers, you wanna fill us in on what's going on with these with the Phyrexians on Kamigawa?
And 1 second. Side note: there's also Kaito. If you forgot about him, but we already went over this in a different video. So
Yeah, I guess I can put the link to the original Kamigawa spoilers in the description if you have not seen those yet. But William, what's going on with Phyrexia here?
Okay, so also in this set is Jin Gitaxias. Now, back a long time ago, it was like what, 9 years ago or something like that. We had new Phyrexia, which included a cycle of 5 Praetors, and one of them was Vorinclex, which we saw last year, which gave us the Phyrexian creature type. And now we see Jingataxias here, as well as Tamio with the keyword completed. So what's happening with this Phyrexia thing? So from what I've read of the story, which wasn't much, but basically, Tamio and Kaito are investigating the death of some kami. They find that Tezzeret was behind them, and he's also they find that Tezzeret is working for Jingataxias. Now, basically, they ask Tezzeret, "Hey, why are you killing all the kami?" And he's like, "We don't want the kami. We are performing tests, okay, on the relationship between the material and the immaterial world. So stuff like that. So then they figure out that what they really want isn't the kami, it's a planeswalker. Then fast forward a bit in the story, Tamio and Kaito are fighting Tezzeret. Tamio underestimates Tezzeret, and he manages to grab her and not planeswalk away with her, disappear somehow, and capture her. Then fast forward a bit later, in the epilogue, we find that Tamio awakens a Phyrexian planeswalker. So it doesn't really explain much about how Tamio becomes a Phyrexian planeswalker, just that the Phyrexians were experimenting uh with making a Phyrexian planeswalker, and Tamio, well,
She became the test.
Yes.
she became the test.
So
Uh,
I think this is going to be very interesting to the story in Magic.
This is definitely setting us up for a return to New Phyrexia. Not this year because we already know it's coming, but probably the year after that.
Yeah, seems
So
pretty
far we've got
obvious.
Vorinclex and Jin-Gitaxias,
And now Tamio.
Shieldred and Shieldred and
Shieldred,
Urabrask are the
Elishnorn,
next two, and then
and
Elishnorn most likely is going to come on the new Phyrexia set, though I'm not sure.
mhm. Yep. So, yeah, I bet they're returning to New Phyrexia. They first started. They first hinted at it with Vorinclex on Kaldheim, and then uh, Vorinclex came with a Phyrexian creature type, which they then eroded to all cards. Now, if it's a Phyrexian card, it has a Phyrexian creature type. Now, with now a year later, with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, we're seeing Jin-Gitaxias come, and we're also seeing Tamio Completed Sage coming with the return of Phyrexian mana, but also this new mechanic Completed. Now, we haven't seen the full set, but I doubt Completed is used on any other card in this set. So I assume that this is a plant for whenever the new Phyrexia thing is, uh, to basically power down Phyrexian mana while still having that Phyrexian flavor uh, to it.
Yeah. I have no idea if this means anything else, but in Strixhaven we had a Tezzerot's Gambit come back in the Mystical Archive, but that's just a Mystical Archive, so it probably does not mean anything.
Anyway, do we want to talk about other cards from
I think the next
this
cards we
set?
can talk about, we could definitely talk about Jin-Gitaxias, and then I think we also should mention we have seen. Let's see, we've seen almost all of the Dragon Spirit cycle.
Yeah.
We've got
Four
one,
out of
two, three. We
five.
got four out of five, and then I guess we can talk about Kodama.
Yep.
All right, so the
And
next
Mechanical
card
and Kotori
that we're going to talk about is
and
Jin-Gitaxias.
Chizuru.
What?
Okay. Oh, I was just naming other mythics. So Jin-Gitaxias, 5 and 2 blue, so very expensive for a 5/5 legendary creature Phyrexian Praetor. Um, and what does she do? So, whenever you cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. This ability only triggers once each turn, and then it has the you know opponent stacksy side of it, which is whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, counter that spell. This ability triggers only once each turn.
Yeah, so this card seems to be definitely different than the old Jin-Gitaxias, kind of like we've seen with the other Praetor, Vorinclex, but at the same time, it also is kind of supporting the same theme of this is definitely a control card.
Yeah, specifically I think like
Though
almost to replace like a Hullbreaker horror.
This would be good in the control mirrors if you can resolve it. Though I'm looking at this and I'm thinking this is a pretty good reanimator target.
Yeah, I
Then
did
again,
think
a
about
lot
that.
of the Praetors are like that.
This is where I disagree with you, because I think Jin-Gitaxias' ability does not work very well with Reanimator. Um, although it will be like very hard to remove because I'll have to cast either an artifact and a removal spell, or two instants or or an instant or a sorcery, and then their removal spell. I feel like doubling up your artifacts or doubling up your instants or sorceries doesn't really win the game. And then other than that, it is just a 5/5 body.
I guess what I'm seeing here is, you could probably, if you can get this down, then cast a second reanimation spell. It is possible that you could bring back two things, and I think that would be kind of interesting. But then
Yeah.
again, if you're gonna reanimate one thing, it might be better just to get an Archon of Cruelty in, at least in Modern. Just something that's gonna win the game on the spot.
Yeah.
Yes,
What do we want to talk
but
about
I just-
next?
I do believe. I'm just thinking about Jintaxius. I think that if you were to do that, I think you'd do that reanimation spell to win the game, not just because I don't think you'd want to have those two reanimation spells in hand. At first, having to reanimate Jintaxius, I think you want to just get that one creature that's gonna straight just win you the game.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So maybe this is more of a Timmy card for
Solos.
Commander, but
Solos, ramp,
yeah,
Like in a ramp deck, this seems insane.
yeah, this does seem like a pretty good ramp card to get to.
Value engine.
But now the other cards that were spoiled, we now see some of the dragon spirits. We already saw it, Sushi the Blazing Sky. Now we have in blue Kairi, I don't know how to pronounce that, the Swirling Sky. I just realized that they all have sky in their names.
Yeah. You
All
just
right, so
realized.
what does
Okay.
Kairi the Swirling Sky do?
Are you talking to me?
Luke, you can read it this time.
Kyrie
Okay.
the Swirling Sky is a 4/blue legendary creature, dragon spirit, 6/6. When Kyrie it's flying ward 3. When Kyrie the Swirling Sky dies, choose one. Turn any number of target non-land permanents with total mana value 6 or less to their owner's hand. Mill 6 cards, then return up to 2 instant or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand.
I think this is definitely one of the weaker cards in the cycle. It's a
Limited?
6 mana 6/6 flying, so
Ward 3.
not
Hard to remove.
that great. The Ward 3 does protect it, but the
But
other problem is that even
protection-
though the Ward 3 protects it, then you're not getting the die triggers, so then it's a lot of times just going to be a 6 mana 6/6 flying, and that is not a great card. But even if they do manage to kill it, the die triggers just aren't amazing. Bouncing some stuff, at least this late in the game, I feel like wouldn't really do much. Considering they can just probably play it out, and a lot of time they won't even have other cards in hand, so that's just really not even a downside for them, except for maybe having to go through Summoning Sickness once. And then the returning instant sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, I guess it's okay, but it really just doesn't seem to have the impact that I would want out of a dragon spirit at Mythic.
6 mana, 6 mana mythic dragon. Anyway, do you want to talk about Ao?
AO?
Ayo?
I don't know.
Dawning Sky?
I guess
Uh,
I can read this one. So,
okay.
AO the Dawn Sky is 3 white for a flying vigilance 5/4 legendary creature dragon spirit. When AO the Dawn Sky dies, choose one. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put any number of non-land permanent cards with total mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest onto the bottom of your library in a random order. And then the other ability is put 2+1/+1 counters on each permanent you control that's a creature or vehicle.
I think this is one of the best of the cycle. I'm just saying that right now, right here.
I think this looks like the kind of card that would be good in a white weenie deck, but it's 5 mana and is just too high on the curve for white weenie.
But I do believe, at least for limited, it could do something.
Oh, all these dragons are insane and limited,
I think
but I feel like this card is just built for
Oh,
one
it-
kind of deck and
it,
doesn't totally work in that deck.
yeah, I don't know. it seems good. I don't know. We'll have to see. I'm on the fence about it.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out in Constructed.
Alright, the last dragon spirit that we know of is Junji, the Midnight Sky. William, what does Junji do?
Okay, so Junji is a 5 mana, 3 black for a 5/5 flying menace dragon with, when it dies, is it, wait, target opponent or each opponent?
Each opponent.
Okay, each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life, and then, or you could choose to reanimate something with mana value 5 or less.
It's put target non-dragon creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield
Oh.
under your control. You lose 2 life.
Is it your graveyard or just?
It's actually any graveyard. So if your opponent's got something cool, then you can take that too.
And with these new bans, I think I haven't seen the cards in Standard, but some of these dragons, I think it's possible that any of these could come in a deck and whirl out as a win con.
I think my biggest problem with a lot of these is just that they're too slow and their dice triggers don't quite do enough to make it worth it. I feel like I'd want a card in, like, for example, Junji. I mean, you'd probably use it as a win con in probably a blue-black control deck, in which case Liar just seems so much better at 5 mana.
Though compared to the other one at Sushi, the Blazing Sky, which was spoiled before, do we think these are better or worse?
I think Atsushi's considerably better than a lot of these. Really, just because it gives you card advantage back or mana, whichever one you need, and it's an earlier threat. 5 mana and 6 mana for these just doesn't seem that great.
Yeah, but even Atsushi doesn't seem amazing. I mean, we just got the deck kind of banned out of this format. I mean,
true. The deck that won the World Championship was only running 3 copies of Epiphany, so it's possible that the Dragons version of the deck can bounce back using cards like Expressive Iteration and all of the great control pieces. It is losing Divide by 0, but maybe it can just run more copies of stuff like Fading Hope or Saw It Coming and try to still do something. It might not be the best deck in the meta, but I still think it's pretty viable.
Agreed. Do we want to talk? What do we want to talk about next?
I think we'll talk about Kodama of the West Tree.
Okay.
Luke, what does this card do?
It is 2 and a green for a legendary creature spirit. 3/3 reach. Modified creatures you control have trample. Whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle.
And just a reminder, modified creatures are anything with equipment, auras you control, and counters.
So when it says auras you control, that means if your opponent charms sleeps your creature, it is not modified.
No, it is not. So, this card seems to be a pretty like card that's directly for one kind of deck. Seems to be more of a commander card, really, because it's
Locus of the Royal.
It is focused on ramping, and it's got the singular-minded strategy of we will do modified.
Well,
like an Omnath Locus of the Royal card.
Well, from what we've seen, I think in the rest of the set, modified is going to be a red-green archetype. So, I think this could be a viable in that deck.
I don't know. I feel like modified creatures, the fact that you have to have the creature as well as some way to get counters or equipment or auras on them just makes it seem too flimsy of an archetype. One removal spell can pretty easily 2-for-1 you, and multiple removal spells is just going to put you so far behind on card advantage that it just seems hard to pull off.
But remember, what is also modification is, I believe, vehicles.
No. Equipment
Vehicles
ores
are
and
not
counters.
modifications.
But when this is equipment, there have been other artifact creature equipments in the set.
Yeah.
Okay, right now I'm going to talk about the card that I think is one of the better cards coming out of the set, and that is Besiege You Who Endures. This is a legendary land that says tap, add a green, it enters untapped, just so you know. And it has Channel. 1 in a green, discard Besiege You Who Endures, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search their library for a land card with a basic land type, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle it. Oh my goodness. Then shuffle. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. Before we start talking about this card, I'm just going to point out, it is weird to read cards that don't say shuffle their library, that just say shuffle. That is hard to read. Anyway.
Yourself, John.
I really like this card because it's basically a free card in a lot of decks. And being able just to have main deck artifact enchantment removal, especially if your opponent's deck is based around a specific artifact or enchantment, can be really huge and will be really huge.
So, the one thing that I don't like is the channel ability. It isn't quite doing as much as I think Wizards intended for it to do. So this is a legendary land. So I believe the gimmick is you have this, you can play it, and if you have multiple copies, you can channel them away. But with a targeted removal spell that is narrow, as you said, you know, this is a reason to play it main deck, but you wouldn't normally play it main deck. I feel like in multiples, this land is kind of bad, and as a well, in multiples, no, not bad. This card isn't amazing.
I think it
And-
really is pretty matchup dependent in that scenario.
I think it's something kind of what the blogatog went on about how, that sometimes we want like those cards that will have good situations, but will also be bad at some points. Like-
So
I think
This
I
is
can
like a
see
good-
this card being played as a one of in the main deck, and then possibly
two
another 1 or 2 copies in the sideboard, in case your opponent is playing an artifact or enchantment deck. And if vehicles or something from this set catches on, I think it can be a pretty nasty card for coming out of the sideboard.
another I like this as maybe a 2 of in this main deck, but in the sideboard, I don't think this is good enough.
I mean, I
does
definitely
ramp
feel like
them,
it's better
and
than
I'd
just a return to nature or something, or some kind of artifact or enchantment removal that you other than this that you'd have in the sideboard. Just because if they don't happen to have their artifact that you want to blow up, you can just play it as a land.
Unless you
Yeah,
have
I
another.
suppose, but there are a lot of really good artifact and enchantment removal spells, like what is it? Trap Breaker. The one from Midnight Hunt.
Oh, Outland Liberator.
Yeah, Outland Liberator.
Yeah, I guess that is a threat as well, so that is something.
Yep. So, I don't know. I feel like this is a good 2 of main deck, and I don't think it's really the best in the sideboard. But then again, we'll see how it shakes out. Anyway, this is actually a cycle. So, what is the other card in this cycle?
John, why don't you read this one?
Alright, I can read it. The other card in the cycle is Sokenzen, Crucible of Defiance. It is a legendary land. Tap, add red, and channel 3 in a red, and discard Sokenzen, Crucible of Defiance. Create 2 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens. They gain haste. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. I don't think this thing is happening. I mean, I think the best you're going to get is probably 2 in a red and make 2/1/1s, which I guess is okay if you're drawing this card in multiples, better than just having a land that does nothing. But really, I don't think this rate is good enough to be worth playing.
No one of. There is no real downside to it.
True.
Yeah.
I guess these cards are going to be probably seeing a lot of playing as 1/0s, just because. I mean, I guess if you're flooding out and you draw it, worst case scenario, you're just paying 4 mana for a couple 1/1s, which at least will keep you alive another couple turns if they're beating you down.
They seem like the mythic MDFC lands, but with worse effects on the front, but less cost on the back.
All right, so I'm gonna open this up to are there any cards that really interest you? Luke, why don't you go first? Any cards in the set that you found cool and you want to talk about?
This one is kind of coming back a bit. Mirror Box, because this was in original Kamigawa, a 5-mana artifact that says the legend rule does not apply to permanents you control. But this is a buffed version.
Legend rule doesn't apply, period.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so this is a buffed version. Not only is it 3 mana, gives a better ability, the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. It says each legendary creature you control gets +1/+1, and each non-token creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with the same name as that creature.
I personally feel like that last ability is going to be pretty irrelevant unless you're building some kind of weird copy crazy legendaries deck. And even then, I feel like +1/+1 really isn't that much of a benefit.
Yeah.
I think this is a lot of just kind of stuff, but really you're just playing it for the 3 mana legend rule doesn't apply.
I'm just
thinking
thinking that I'm surprised that they buffed a card so much, even though it has been a while.
It was so bad.
Yeah, I think they wanted to open up the abilities of actually building some kind of copy legendaries
Commander.
deck,
Like,
which I would be totally
if you're
cool.
playing like a
I think it would
clone
be pretty
deck
cool.
in Commander, I can't clone any of my legendaries now. Now I'm sad, but if I play this, then
I do
the
feel like
legend rule
this is
doesn't
probably
apply, so I
more
can
of a
clone
commander
my
card.
legendary creatures, and now my clones have the same name as my other clones. My other copy of the card, and now it gets a bonus. So I think it could see play in very niche commander decks.
I think this is more of a commander card, though I feel like you could probably build some kind of fun deck in standard or something with it.
Yeah.
I mean, you could probably play cards like Glasspool Mimic just to make copies of some kind of really cool legendary that you've got.
William, do you want to say your card?
Yeah. So I want to talk about the reality chip. So this identifies a few things. For one, this is mentioned in the story. So you can go look at the story. I was talking about it earlier at I believe magic.story.com. Or just search up Magic the Gathering story, and it should come up. So the reality chip is a 0/4 for 1 and a blue. It's a legendary artifact creature equipment jellyfish. So we have equipment creatures now. So we'll see how this works.
I'm thinking this is going to play somewhere along the lines of Bestow. Though
Yeah.
we'll
Anyway.
see it.
But it is a bit better because you can now
Anyway,
unequip.
let me read the card. Let me read the
Yep.
card. You may look at the top card of your library anytime, so this applies when it's an equipment or a creature. And as long as it's attached to a creature, you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. So when this is, and then it has reconfigure for 2 and a blue. So reconfigure is a lot like equip, but you can also just unattach it. So it's attached to target creature you control or unattached from a creature. Reconfigure only is a sorcery. While attached, this isn't a creature. So you can reconfigure it onto something if you want it to be a um, if you want it to be an equipment. For this, the benefits of that is you'll be able to play the lands and cast the spells from the top of your library. But let's just say you want to, like, I don't know, you have some spare mana and you might want to leave it back to block. You can reconfigure it off of your creature, and it will become a 0/4, but you can no longer cast the spells.
Yeah, I think this is interesting because it lets you say,
Also,
okay, I need card advantage right now. I can equip it, or I really need a blocker. I can unequip it. I think this is also more of a commander card. I think this is probably too slow for constructed.
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to mention it because
I do think
A, it's an equipment jellyfish. B, it's probably one of the better versions of these reconfigure cards that we
And it also
have
has
for
quite a bit of
constructed.
flavor too.
I think the equipment creatures definitely have something going for them. However, I think this one seems to be just a little too slow.
Yep, agreed. Do you want to wrap it up with some other cool things?
I think we've kind of covered a lot of the cool cards in the set. But just some overall things. Anything interesting that you guys have noticed?
Yes. I really
sagas.
I noticed there's these things called now common sagas.
Yeah.
So this is newer.
Yep. So sagas have been around, but they've usually been only mythic, rare, or uncommon. Now
mostly just because of the complication of how they work. I think they've realized that they've been around for long enough now that they've decided, you know what, we can probably put them at common as long as we have them be pretty simple.
Another thing you might have noticed that's been mentioned is the return of vehicles.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Well, the vehicles I did notice, they were in Kaldenheim, which is still a set in standard. So they're returning, but they're not returning. They kind of already are still here.
Well, they're returning as a mechanic. Anything else? We did mention Channel. Channel is an ability where you can pay a mana and discard it for an effect. There's also another cycle which we didn't get to mention. There's the Calamity cycle, which is 1 and then color. So 5 mana. And they're so far we have the black and the red one. You can look at them yourself.
Oh, it's not the Calamity cycle. It's the Invoked cycle.
Yeah.
Oh, it is? Oh, it's the Invoke cycle.
We only have 2 of them. Invoke Despair and Invoke Calamity. But they are pretty powerful cards. They don't seem amazing, but in monocolored decks, there are 5 mana card that lets you get a pretty reasonable effect.
There's also a callback to Goblin Welder with Scrap Welder, just to mention.
Yep.
2 in a red, 3/3. You can tap it, sack an artifact with mana value X, and then you return an artifact with mana value less than X from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste.
Yeah, so I think I mean, I don't know if you guys have noticed this too, but we've been going over all of these cards, and it just seems like there's a lot going on in this set, possibly too much, especially for limited.
It's kind of confusing with there's like ninjutsu, there's all these callbacks, there's these cycles,
vehicles, sagas,
modified.
I know, it's like we've got a few limited archetypes, and from the few there's like, you know, you've got samurais and warriors. Okay, pretty simple. But then you've got what else? You've got, you know, returning cards from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, pretty normal. You've got ninjutsu, you've got enchantments, you've got artifacts. You know, you've just got all these different things.
There's enchantment. It just seems, it feels like they're
really
kind of all over the place.
And I believe they're also doing modified as a.
Yeah, modified is
which
like
might
probably going to be the green
red and red
one.
maybe.
And yeah.
Yeah, this set feels a little.
Are going to be like
this set just feels all
blue.
over the place.
Oh, one little
Although
last.
I do like it. It feels like a bit more of an advanced set with a lot of cool callbacks, and also a lot for new players.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing, just a little end note, kind of. I enjoy playing these. There are these things called now shrine creatures. And
Yeah.
I enjoy playing my shrine decks. So this is gonna be new for me.
Yep. There's probably a new cycle of shrines in the form of legendary enchantment creatures.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, you know it would be sweet.
What?
Shrine Commander, legendary enchantment creature, and it's 5 colors. It's a shrine. It's a commander.
Oh yeah,
that-
Shrine Dex and Commander.
Because now that they're legendary creatures
Yep.
Yeah.
as well
Well,
as
now that I'm
enchantments.
thinking about it, if there's a new cycle here, there's gonna be 16 shrines, and that's not a bad number. That's
Yeah, no, that's enough to fill a deck.
yep.
That's enough. Yeah, that's enough to build a deck as well. That way you can also have a bunch of other stuff that also works well with the shrine strategy. But yeah, this does kind of feel like a Modern Horizons set that is set on one plane.
A powered down modern.
Powered
Horizons,
down,
for
yeah.
That matter.
I feel like they had basically two things. They had the idea of like cyberpunk Japan, and then they had, oh hey, we can do Kamigawa with this. They kind of mushed them together, and then half the sets each, and it just makes it hard to have any kind of consistent theme.
Yeah, I'm with John on this.
Yep. Well, do we want to round ourselves up for this podcast then?
I believe so. I think this is probably the end of the first podcast episode of Competitively Viable. So, I guess I'll remind everyone. So, William, where can we find you?
Well, I guess me and my sister have a baking channel on the odds and ends. So if you're one of the few people that's into baking, you can go there.
Yep, cool recipes. I recommend adding mint chocolate chips. And I will put these links in the description. Luke, where can we find you?
My channel is Where the Lotus Grows. It is a Magic the Gathering channel, and I do gameplay videos, news. Although you probably want to look here if you want to see the news. And I'll just do other fun stuff like that. So
I believe you also have a tutorial series going on right about now.
I am doing a tutorial series
How
too.
to play Magic the Gathering.
Yes.
I have that channel in my homepage for this channel. If you go down there, you can also click the subscribe button. Great idea, by the way. And you can go check out his channel because, well, he's my brother. Got to advertise him. And that seems to be the end of the first episode. I think it went pretty well. Comment below what you think. But
suggestions?
comment suggestions. Anything we can do better to make this podcast more enjoyable for the people out there. And I think that's everything. So we will see you next week.